Nation in Conversation, proudly brought to you by Afgreen, Fort Knox, Hinterland, Monsanto, Nedbank, NWK and Senders. The majority of men meet failure because their lack of persistence in creating new plans to take the place of those which fail. A good objective of leadership is to help those who are doing poorly to do well, and to help those who are doing well to do even better.
Good day and welcome to Nation in Conversation. I'm Theo Foster. At Nation in Conversation, we aim to create a better understanding of the agricultural industry and demonstrate how essential a healthy sector is to ensure food security and our continued existence. Today we're going to talk about primary production, how it's changed, what's the challenges, and what lies ahead. You can follow us on Twitter at Nation Converse or visit the website nationinconversation.co.za. With me in the studio today is Inge Kotze. She's from WWF. She's a Senior Manager, Sustainable Agriculture. And Kobus Steenekamp. He's the Managing Director of Monsanto South Africa. Welcome. Kobus, I would like to start with you. If you look at primary production of agriculture today, and you look back 10, 15, 20 years ago, there's been tremendous changes in terms of production, technology, yields. Give us some background.
Yeah, indeed, agricultural has changed a lot over the last 15, 20 years. If you can remember back, many years back, in South Africa, we still used ploughing as our primary land production. That has changed to today, where we have a bigger focus on conservation agriculture. Also, farmers moved into the total extreme direction of no tillage or zero tillage. That is on the side of agricultural practices. But what has made this possible was the farmers' resilience, their ability to make changes over time, and also to adopt technologies. Specifically biotechnology, some technologies that has increased productivity over many years has come into play and contributed to making farming more sustainable.
If we look at those yield enhancements that we have experienced, can you give us a framework in terms of what we've actually experienced?
Yeah, 15, 20 years back, our average yield in South Africa was just over 2.5 tons per hectare. And what is important to note is that in those years, we planted our maize crop on about 4 million hectares. Today, our average yield is close to 5 tons per hectare, and we have reduced the number of hectares to 2.6 million. So you can see a tremendous reduction in the amount of land that we use, but productivity has increased, basically doubled over these past 20 years.
Inge, I want to pick up on a point that Kobus made. The fact that agriculture, we've increased the yield, but what has also become important is resources is a scarce commodity. Water, land, to name two. The balance between agriculture in terms of the yield and the resources, the environment. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct, that we've had an incredibly productive agricultural sector over the last 20 years, huge increases in yield and optimal production, but that is off the basis of South Africa, which is a relatively scarce country in terms of the two primary determinants of agriculture, water and soil, like you've mentioned. And I think if you look at the statistics for South Africa, less than 3% of our soils are highly fertile, good agricultural soils. We sit with about 2/3 of our water used by agriculture, yet we are quite a water-stressed, water-scarce country. So the last 20 years, there has been that availability. As we look at the current situation, we are beginning to look at restraints and limitations specifically around the natural resource space. And that's where we need to focus on how do we maintain this productivity and optimal yield alongside the constraints and increasing scarcity, both physical and then economic pricing scarcity of these two resource bases.
Kobus, some of these changes that we note, technology is actually assisting in terms of water usage, in terms of effectivity, in terms of pesticides. What are the major benefits that we've seen from the technology side?
Inge has mentioned two critical components that is needed for sustainable agriculture. Of course, the land, that's where we grow the crop, and then secondly, the water that we need to use to produce a crop. Now, what we have today in South Africa, we have various competitors for water, and as Inge has mentioned, agriculture uses a lot of water to produce crops. So from Monsanto's side, we work on technologies to reduce the need of water. We want to make plants available that use water more efficiently. So that is one of the critical components. But then it goes further. We need to protect the soil as well, because that's also a resource that is available in limited quantities. So we need to make technologies available that conserve the soil. That's where certain herbicide-tolerant technologies that has helped us to reduce, for instance, cultivation. We don't have to plow anymore. We can move to systems of conservation agriculture. As an example, in the about 15 years back, when farmers were still plowing, they used up to 87 liters of diesel per hectare. As they moved over to conservation agriculture, it has reduced to about 58 liters. Today, farmers that make use of or on a system of zero tillage only use about 21 liters up to the point of harvest. So you can see various benefits that has been brought on by adoption of new technologies. Soil are conserved on one side, and also you limit the evaporation of water by decreasing the number of tillage operations.
That sounds to me that there is technology moving in the right direction, but we still need to have all the elements in balance. Is that not the case?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. I think we've had the luxury of good availability of resources to date. Now we're beginning to feel those constraints as we look at economic growth and development and those competing land uses that Kobus was referring to. We are agriculture playing more and more in competition with mining, urbanization for water resource. We're simply going to have to use less to create more in future. So that 2/3 is the maximum amount of water agriculture is going to be able to access. So technology has given us the efficiencies, it's given us the optimal production, but where we really need to start focusing now, which has had less of an emphasis to date, is really the natural environment. So the natural environment in our farmlands, in our commercial farmlands largely, has been considered unmarginal agricultural area. So if it's economically unviable, we won't spend a cent on it because we don't get a cent of return on it. But yet those systems are really our buffering systems, they are our capacity systems for dealing with water quality issues, for dealing with a changing climate, intense weather events, more risk, more vulnerability, more uncertainty in this sector. So we need to start understanding that our farm is bigger than just the production units. We need to be managing our natural areas, our natural systems, maintaining and protecting those to increase our resilience and viability of the agricultural sector going forward.
I want to focus on those challenges, but also what does that require from a farmer? Nation in Conversation will be back right after the break. Welcome back to Nation in Conversation. Today we talk about the challenges facing primary food production. Kobus, if one listens to what Inge was saying, obviously it puts another set of challenges to the farmer. The farmer needs to be part of the environment. The farmer needs to be part of a long-term sustainable production ecosystem. What's that challenges, and how would farmers approach that?
So one of the biggest risks today for a farmer is, of course, the constant changing climate. So we see weather patterns are changing, the planting season starts later. So the farmer needs to focus more on conserving water in the early parts of the season, and that's where they will adopt certain technologies to make sure that they conserve the water in that specific periods where it rains before planting season. But as you have mentioned, farmers need to take much more ownership about the valuable resource that they have available, in this case land. And what we see today is more and more farmers are moving closer to biological farming, adding that as a component to their current conventional practices. But I think we need to make it clear and state that biological practices will be complementing traditional or modern agriculture. It will not be either the one or the other. And I think that's how we need to look at just making agriculture more sustainable over the next 10, 15, 20 years by adding various components, let these components work together, ultimately to protect our biodiversity and to increase the food production.
Inge, Kobus notes more responsibility on a farmer. And you noted that the farmer cannot only focus on the maximum yield or maximum production. That means there's a responsibility on the farmer. How would you sketch that responsibility?
So the responsibility is on the farmer, but I think the responsibility also needs to look back into the value chain to support the farmer. The farmer is always, in South Africa, probably our number one key custodian of our natural assets. If you take that, about 80% of our land surface in South Africa is under farmlands, be it communal, tribal, or commercial agriculture. And farmers play a very key role. First and foremost, our water resources, our wetland systems and our river systems are really the arteries that keep the functioning system alive. And about 50% of wetlands to date have been transformed through agriculture. And those systems are really some of our biggest buffers, some of our biggest protections against increasing flood, increasing volumes of water, drought, filtration and purification of water in terms of water quality. They're the farmer's best friend. And we need to be working to compensate farmers, to work alongside farmers to bring those systems back into functional value into their systems and their river systems and their buffers in terms of managing their water runoff and their soil and topsoil runoff into the system. So farmers play a very critical role in managing those systems, but it's a costly exercise. And many of us are achieving downstream benefits from what the farmer is doing up in the tributaries or in the catchments, and we need to start working alongside the farmer to finance some of those activities which are beyond just the economic value of what the farmer can get off that land.
You touched on finance. Clearly, if one were to take that responsibility, there's a cost accompanied to that responsibility. What is the best way to try to alleviate that cost and not make it purely the farmer's responsibility, but a broader responsibility?
So Theo, when we look at our national development plan, there's been a lot of focus on physical infrastructure projects. So a lot of our budget's been going to physical infrastructure projects. How do we move water physically around the system to where it's needed? How do we get energy into the system as the two key components of agricultural production? But one of the terminology, or some of the terminology coming through now, is investment into ecological infrastructure. So how do we invest back into our catchments through some of our municipal budgets, through some of our grants from the public or private sector in terms of alien invasive plant clearing? They're huge guzzlers of water. They drive erosion of soil. So how do we start looking at alien invasive plant clearing? How do we start managing fire in the system? And how do we start jointly bearing the costs? And there's some fantastic examples of public-private partnerships already working for water, the natural resource management schemes with government and private sector beginning to fund the farmer to manage those alongside their production units on farm. So it's very much how do we come alongside the farmer and support the farmer where they're giving us greater goods and services beyond just the agricultural production on their land.
Matt, it is going to be a matter of balance, but Kobus, I'd like to bring you in again. We've talked about the yields on commercial farms, and we have some of the best yields that comparable to the rest of the world, where we use the best technology and where our farmers are very quick to adapt technology, to adapt new methods of farming. But then we have a sector in our farming community where the yields are extremely low. We are not partaking in that. From a technology or from a product point of view, how are we going to breach that gap?
I think the nice thing about some of the technologies that a company like Monsanto is offering is scale neutral. In other words, it means that a farmer with access to 1 or less hectares of land will be able to use these technologies. They will be able to control their weeds better. They will be able to control their insects better. I think where the subsistence farmer technologies that they will not be able to use, for instance, is the precision farming type of technologies, where more on a commercial scale use bigger tractors, bigger planters to plant seed more in a precise way, precise fertilizer applications and those types of things. But there are various projects ongoing today, and we need to note some of those projects where Grain South Africa is involved, where they work with these subsistence farmers, smallholder farmers, and also so-called semi-commercial farmers that will in the future become commercial farmers and also contribute to sustainable farming. So over time, we need to make sure that we have sufficient knowledge transfer, make them aware of the best practices, prevent things like overgrazing, which normally leads to soil erosion and contaminating rivers later on. And also you lose a lot of very valuable soil resources. So a lot of work needs to be done. What we see today is commercial farmers working together with small-scale farmers, subsistence farmers, also transferring those knowledges. But we have mentioned now organized agriculture, individual farmers, companies like us, but the government also has a huge responsibility to play and make sure that we get the small-scale sector also more involved in making sure that we have enough food for the future.
I would like to talk about that further, but we'll be back just after the break. Welcome back. This is Nation in Conversation. Inga, we talked about lifting the traditional or communal farmer to a yield that we can expect in the commercial farming industry. What are the challenges and how should one approach that?
So Theo, I think it's exactly that we sit with this dual economy of a commercial sector that really has got resource efficiency and production at its optimal level, consolidation happening, rising input costs, the need to get those economies of scale. And then you sit with a communal tribal areas, smallholder areas where you are needing to get those economies of scale again to manage the input cost as well as increase the production and yield of those areas. And I think the primary challenge for us is getting the knowledge, the information, the technology transferred, finding the extension services and rebuilding the extension services into those areas, as well as finding the way in which to get collective effort happening, because there are so many, almost 4 million small-scale growers, if you look at it at a household level to small-scale grower level, 40,000 commercial growers. How do we get the information, the technology transfer to the smallholder space in a resource-efficient manner? So I really think our challenge is how we get extension, information, technology together, and how we get groups working collaboratively, mentorship models, collaborative cooperative models. But I think one of the questions that we skirt around in terms of land reform, and land becoming quite a central issue in South Africa at the moment in terms of policy debate, and that debate needs to be looked at in terms of ownership, but in terms of where we sit with limited resource availability and competing resource availability, we have to ensure we're getting maximum productivity or optimal productivity out of the resources that we have available and where they are allocated to. So I think a lot of the land reform debate in the agricultural area needs to focus a lot more on how do we get optimal production out of this system, because we only have so much available in the system to work with.
And there's specific structural issues that will need to be addressed from government, but also from the farmers participating in the industry.
Absolutely. It's going to be a government, a public sector, private sector, and farmer associations, farmer level collaboration that's required. I think there's so much ad hoc good work happening. It's now how do we increase the scale and the impact, because we don't have the luxury of time in this space. How do we increase that to get the real impact that we're looking for with collaborative partnerships and bigger coordination of those ad hoc projects?
Kobus, if you look to the future, and I want to focus more on technology and the demands on the farmer going forward, what is the major challenges lying ahead, and how will we overcome those challenges?
I believe, and we have mentioned it earlier, one of the biggest challenges will be weather changes, climatological changes, rainfall coming later and disappearing in a January-February type of period. So we will have to focus more on water use efficiencies. The majority of seed companies today, when they analyze and evaluate their new hybrids that are going to put into the market, focus on water use efficiency. So we need to make sure that we bring products to the market. It can be conventional, but also biotechnology products that use water more efficient. And then we also need to focus on crops and place crops in the correct areas. I think a very good tendency today that we see is that soybeans are increasing. So we need to focus and bring more technologies also for the soybean farmer to make sure that they can farm sustainably. The first crop, cotton, hectares has been reducing over the last couple of years to as low as 7,000 hectares. But due to the dry weather in the northwest province, we have seen that farmers in the far west areas are increasingly focusing on cotton. So cotton has natural drought tolerance, and it copes much better with those adverse conditions. But then secondly, if you look at agricultural productivity in South Africa, we need to also bring all these fallow lands, the communal lands, the lands available in the Eastern Cape, we need to bring those hectares into production to offset all the hectares that we lose towards mining and other developments that are ongoing today in South Africa.
Inga, the challenges facing a farmer today, looking forward. Obviously, you focus strongly on the balance. From the type of management tools that a farmer will need going forward, what will that be?
So I think we've touched on a lot of it today in terms of the limited resource availability, the efficiency has got us so far, and it's not going to get us that much further because our resources are going to be allocated to other sectors. I think first and foremost, before we even look at the farmer, we as a nation have to really start looking at the National Development Plan as our growth plan, our blueprint for development, yet we have not laid that out spatially. Do we understand what resources are available, what the competition for those resources are between the different sectors? Water, energy, land, food production, how do those lay out spatially? What are the explicit trade-offs? And we need to start speaking about that and negotiating about that. But at the moment, you have sector development, economic development laid out, and they are going to compete with each other in terms of limitation of water or land. So I think we need to have a very explicit discussion around spatial planning, around resources and availability in South Africa. The second component then, if you take it down to the farmer, is how do we, yes, focus on resource efficiency as the first way in which you manage your input costs, you manage viability and production on your farm, but then how do you start working with your entire farmland, your catchment, your bigger area, and understanding the value of managing those systems and needing to spend money on managing those systems to keep them in a functioning state, because they offer us many, many free goods and services that will help us buffer a changing climate and increasing pressure on the sector.
Inga, is there enough goodwill, enough understanding amongst the commercial farming community if we look at their broader responsibility?
I think so. I think the commercial farming space is such a hard space to be in at the moment. There are so many obligations, just in terms of the rising input costs that we've mentioned many times, but all the different policy positions that are coming from social, from land. It's a very tough space to be in. And I think there's a great willingness from the commercial farmer. It's getting that information down to a practical level that they can take pragmatic steps. What is the next step? What's required us to do? And it's getting that information transferred to the farmer. But they are custodians, they're deeply dependent on their land and for their livelihoods, and they are willing to make the right move. It's just getting enough information and enough collaboration in the system to support them to do that.
Kobus, looking ahead 5, 10, 15 years, what do you see?
I think we have exciting times ahead of us. As soon as the government can finalize the policy framework on land redistribution, I think that will further increase the fact that farmers will take continued ownership of their land, of their fields, giving access of land to new semi-commercial and commercial developing or new era farmers will definitely contribute to the success of South Africa as a farming community. We all know that we are dependent on the farmers for continuous food security, and definitely they are willing to play their role. They are willing to adopt new technologies, and then also, very important, contribute to the mentoring programs that we have in various parts of South Africa already quite successful. We just need to expand on those and bring in the new producers, the new era producers also onto full-scale production.
So if we talk about the yield gap, you believe there's enough goodwill, there's enough technology over long term that will supply us with additional food?
Yeah, definitely. So farmers have surprised us over many years. They are very resilient, they adopt quickly. We have seen over the last couple of years, the farmers are demanding more and more newer technologies, and they drive actually sometimes faster than the input providers the need for technology. So that's a very positive sign for South Africa in the future.
Are you as positive of the future?
I think that there are new trends emerging, small trends but significant trends that are coming through. I think resource efficiency and optimal production has got us so far. We're in a good space as we stand, but I think that pressure is going to increase to the point that resource efficiency isn't going to carry us forward in keeping that production. I think there are other areas that need focus. We speak about the need globally to produce 70% more food by 2050. So 35 years, how do we get 70% more food in the system? Yet we waste 30 to 40% of food in every element of the food chain, from farm right to fork on our plate. So how do we start addressing food waste, really working into distribution, storage, and primary production around food waste? And I think consumption patterns and what we grow, where we grow it, and what we eat. We're beginning to get glimmers that there are changing dynamics in that system, and that we're going to have to look beyond just resource efficiency and technology and optimal production to get us out of a tight space with feeding a growing population and changing consumption patterns.
Well, if there's changes, there's opportunities. Thank you very much. Please join the conversation. You can visit our website, nationinconversation.co.za, or visit us on Twitter at NationConverse. Until next week, from me, Theo Foster, goodbye.
Nation in Conversation, proudly brought to you by AFGRI, Fort Knox, Hinterland, Monsanto, Nedbank, NWK, and Sendes.
The world is changing. Let's stand together, put our hands together, join hands forever. We're making it better.
No matter where you are, you could be near or far away.
We're singing together, we're dancing together, we're changing.